Woke hypocrisy is a subject that people are continually discussing, whether it's AOC's dress to the Met Gala or particular symbols that could be seen as woke washing without investing in the real issues behind gesture politics. It's something that's being discussed. With the Biden administration promising tax breaks for the ultra rich, we ask, do these gestures actually connect to something real? And social justice has to be about changing people's lives, improving the experience of ordinary Americans, however they identify, whatever they wear, however they appear, whatever they seem like. Otherwise, we risk living in a world where disconnected symbols pass for an ideology without ever changing the experience of real ordinary people. Civil rights is vital. Social justice is important. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, you ought to be able to be free, to live as who you are and express yourself. But talking about many of the symbols that are dominating public discourse, Nesreen Malik said, the speed with which these symbols are circulated and consumed makes them even more likely to be appropriated in a sort of cultural marketplace where politics is literally an accessory. Last week, AOC went to the Met Ball wearing a dress emblazoned with the slogan, "Tax the Rich." She explained the decision as an opportunity to extend the reach of her anti-capitalist politics. The medium is the message, she wrote on Instagram. That's obviously a famous Marshall McLuhan quote where he says the medium itself becomes the information. But if you take that in this context, it means that the dress would be the message or the Met Ball would be the message. You know, tax the rich is still a provocative piece of language to many Americans who don't want the state involved in their lives, who believe in liberty and the right to stand up to authority. But actually, Biden pledged on his campaign trail to do exactly the opposite to that.
I don't think 500 billionaires are the reason why we're in trouble. And the folks at the top aren't bad guys.
I had a chilling flash forward to a line of tax the rich merchandise trotted out by rich influencers or maybe rendered in jewellery, much like the Vote necklace popularised by Michelle Obama, 310 quid. On the way to the mainstream that Ocasio-Cortez wanted to reach through the Met Ball, there is a giant cultural and commercial net, one that catches everything and turns as much as it can into cheap but still overpriced product. Audre Lorde famously said, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." But the rest of the quote, less often cited, warns us that it will often look at first like winning. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. I suppose the framework within which many of these gestures are taking place is in itself prohibitive to real change. It cannot ever yield to real change. The Met Ball is, whether or not it raises loads of money for charity, and I bet you it does, in itself, it is an example of a certain type of elitism. It is a celebration of a certain type of culture. There are doubtless successes when you see people from different types of backgrounds rather than, say, just the people that you traditionally associate with success in nations that have a majority white population. That is definitely progress of a type. But if it doesn't change the experience of many, many ordinary people, it is literally a symbol, a gesture. What does it mean if there are more billionaires, one or two, drawn from particular classes, cultures, or ethnic groups, if the vast majority of people from those same groups continue to suffer the normal, ordinary consequences of poverty brought about by endemic inequality? Look inside yourself. I'm talking for myself, but I'm talking to you. I want racial equality. I want gender equality for all. I don't care about people's lives and practices and religions, wherever they come from, deep working class, white, any kind of religious identification. People should be free. However, that can't happen within the current system. The system is robust enough to make gestures, to change its branding, to incorporate relevant and necessary logos of the day, to ensure that they're on message and that they post the right things and say the right things. What it can't ever do is reduce and limit its profits so that ordinary people can have access to more resources. I'm not talking here because sometimes I see from the comments that you get confused. There is a requirement in pyramid-shaped societies for there to be an underclass. There is a requirement in a post-industrialist, no longer manufacturing, outsourcing nation to deal with the now disbanded workforce, particularly with the onset of AI. There is a connection. It's not like, Russell, you seem to think it's a limited pie. You know, any one of these people can get rid. No, they can't. That simply isn't how it works. You're been brainwashed and you're citing the mantras of the overlords. This system will not ever work for you, and it particularly will not work if the parties of the apparent left or the parties of the apparent people are happy to settle for symbols instead of real change. It is common enough to observe that political symbols and gestures are too easily co-opted and commercialised, but today there is a more insidious risk that we will mistake this for winning. Over the past 18 months, more of our politics than usual has been conducted in this strange liminal space online where, whether as spectators or participants, we exhaust our energy scrolling through the highlight reels of police brutality, falling statues and black squares of solidarity. Any ground won here is illusory. The expansion of the online space overemphasises the impact and reach of virtual discourse, and one could easily mistake the fact we are having these conversations at all for a sort of victory in itself. But these arguments don't translate to winning power in the real world. They're all heat and no light. As I've told you before, the gay rights activist Peter Tatchell told me that when it comes to civil rights issues, ultimately people can bring about change through protest, but in his experience, he said, when it comes to economic change, it's a lot harder to achieve. In the conversation, Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zuckman, they are professors of economics at Berkeley University, California, wrote this about Biden and the Democratic Party's recent taxation policies. The House Ways and Means Committee outlined plans on September the 13th to move the top marginal income rate up a couple of notches to 39.6% and to introduce a 3% surtax on incomes above $5 million. That proposal would fall short of calls to really tax the rich, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's dress demanded at a New York bash just hours later. You could sort of see, right, from an overview, this is not questioning Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's principles and values, which seem to me to be pretty sincere, but you can see how she could be used as a symbol for radicalism that has no real ability for that radicalism to translate into change, because on the same day that she was wearing that dress, this change took place. Tax policy is deemed progressive if the chunk of income taken increases with the income of the individual. The committee's plan would roughly put tax progressivity back to where it was just before Trump signed off on Republican tax cuts in 2017. That would still be far below the level of progressivity that the United States embraced in the middle of the 20th century, when wealthier individuals paid a much higher share of their income in taxes than the poor. In 1950, when looking at all federal, state and local taxes, the top 0.01% of earners paid almost 70% of their income in taxes. In the post-war decades, corporate profits, the main source of income for the rich, were subject to an effective corporate tax rate of 50%. Meanwhile, the rich were subject to high tax rates on wages, dividends, interest and income from partnerships. The progressivity of the US tax system has dramatically declined over the past 7 decades. The upshot is that for most income levels, the US tax system now resembles a flat tax that becomes regressive at the very top end, meaning that the super rich pay proportionately less. The super rich's low tax rates of today are in part aided by the collapse of federal corporate taxation. In the 50s, 5 to 7% of national income came from corporate taxes. In 2018, that figure had fallen to just 1.5%. Often when people say things like the rich pay the majority of taxes and stuff in right versus left old school conventional discourse, they include only one strata of taxation. They avoid talking about the areas where there have been regressive tax breaks offered. I'm not a kind of, central state tax the rich type person. I just believe that real inequality, rampant inequality, needs to be controlled, and that when you have huge entities hoovering up wealth transfer, mass wealth transfer such as has taken place during this pandemic, that there needs to be some regulation to stop it. I'm not talking about ordinary people who have built a business and done well, like people that are personal development style folk. I'm talking about corporations, centralized corporations that are amassing obese, gluttonous, surfeit, unnecessary wealth that's like a kind of disorder. You know already that the 3 richest people in America have as much collective wealth as the 50% of lowest earners. That's the kind of thing that you could address with a stroke of a pen, and in any sensible society worthy of that name, you would. The proposal unveiled by House Democrats would increase taxes on millionaires, but it would largely leave billionaires off the hook, despite the explosion of their wealth during the pandemic. On his 2019 campaign trail, Joe Biden assured rich donors at a ritzy New York fundraiser that nothing would fundamentally change if he's elected. Don't you think that in those words there is the panacea and cure for any potential celebration at Joe Biden's election? Don't you think that the transfer of wealth that's taken place during this pandemic is a clear indication of an ongoing problem that transcends party politics, and that just moving the pieces or the deck chairs on the Titanic just a little bit is not enough for the kind of crises, both social, economic, ecological, psychological and spiritual, that we now face? That politicians and public figures posing as bastions of real change when offering such meek reforms, such meaningless offers, while never doing anything about the truly powerful, because on the campaign trail they've explained that nothing will really change, should be taken to heart by any of you that claim to care about social justice, any of you that claim to care about real politics, real change, community empowerment, mobilising meaningfully for involvement in your own life, for a bit of virtue, a bit of valour, a bit of vim, a sense that your life means something. How can we continue to passionately participate in this spectacle that doesn't change anything because it pledges in advance to the powerful that it will not change anything? You will never get real change by shouting in that direction. Only when you begin to build adjacent nations, alternative communities among yourself, refusal to participate, peaceful protest, new alliances, willingness to look across the aisle or across imaginary divides, to dispatch with your belief that you're vastly different from a Trump supporter or a Clinton supporter, to remember that the whole thing didn't make any difference anyway, and to take back control of your own communities so that they're an expression of your real true values, rather than being caught up in a web of symbols, a net of hatred behind a veil of media deception and political expedience. They remain in power. They'll be happy for life. All the people that march in and out of Capitol Hill and the White House and go through the revolving Wall Street door and the big tech Silicon Valley privilege conveyor belt, they're set for life. They'll be fine. It's exactly that strata of culture that needs to change. We're not talking about the ordinary progress brought about by the moxie of plucky Americans. We're talking about institutional, tyrannical, irreproachable hegemony that can only be altered by grassroots action, by real values, and a willingness to let go of empty, hopeless symbols and old-fashioned prejudices. If you agree with what I was just piping on about then, hit me in the comments. Tell me where you think I went wrong. I know you will. Tell me where you think we could improve. Subscribe, give it a like, turn on the notification bell if you want. You can listen to my podcast Under the Skin, where I have deep conversations about this stuff all the time with people from across the political spectrum. You can get it on Apple, anywhere in the world. Yeah, I know. So also, if you like this video, have a look at this one. It's a little bit like it, maybe a little bit better. If you want to meditate now because you need to chill, have a look at this saucy little sausage. It'll calm you right down. But most of all, sign up to my mailing list at russellbrand.com and stay free and don't get angry. Do something positive for yourself. Thank you.